Reading Adam back with you again. Today I'm going to be talking about The Diamond Age by Neal Stephenson. Now, uh, real quick, I should mention that I have read a lot of Neal Stephenson's works. My favorite probably is Reamed, which is a misspelling of Read Me, which anybody who's familiar with computers would be very familiar with that title. I just thought it was a fantastic story, very easy to understand what was going on, and in that way, you enjoy it more. So there's two kinds of Neal Stephenson novels. There's ones that you're just trying to figure out what the heck's going on, and then there's the kind that you feel like you're along for a wild ride. So Cryptonomicon felt that way, Wild Ride Way. Reamed felt that way. Seven Eves felt that way. Zodiac felt that way, and so did Snow Crash. Diamond Age kind of reminded me a bit of Anathem. Anathem was, I couldn't. That was a very difficult read, probably the hardest novel I've ever read, and I just didn't enjoy it that much. By the time I was done reading, I was like, what the heck did I just read? I had to look up stuff about the book to figure out what it was about. And I'm not ashamed of saying that, but I probably should have read it a bit slower. But you know how sometimes you don't want to slow down your reading just to gain comprehension, because you feel like if it's this hard to understand at my normal reading speed, and I understand most things at this speed, then why am I doing this, right? Why am I reading this? Anyways, The Diamond Age kind of reminded me of Anathem in that way. Much more easy to understand than Anathem, but in of itself, compared to his other works, the last book of his I read before Diamond Age was Seven Eves, and I really enjoyed that. Very good, simple to understand. I feel like he has gotten better with his novels over time. But Diamond Age, I think it was his second novel or so, one of his early novels. And I had often heard through like the Tim Ferriss podcast, I had heard a lot of people recommend The Diamond Age as one of the books you should read, as a very interesting book. Snow Crash was the other one. Snow Crash is actually very interesting. It has some very interesting food for thought regarding the whole Tower of Babel incident, and he weaves a very interesting story around that. I guess you would consider his type of books. Wow, I can't even. Is it punk fiction? Now all of a sudden I forget what you would. Steampunk? No, cyberpunk. Cyberpunk. So it's a little bit in the future, contains a lot of things about computers and science, and there's also a bunch of punks in it. So the Diamond Age is the title itself refers to this futuristic scenario of human living on Earth. You don't know exactly when it is, but nanotechnology is a big thing. Nanotechnology is mainstream enough where it's changed civilization. So at least the book, it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting things in the book, but I didn't find the storyline all that compelling. The interesting things are, if you want to look at the book from an interesting perspective, you at least get to see Neal Stephenson's vision of a future of nanotechnology. And mankind being able to manipulate things on the atomic level a lot better. So literally constructing things out of diamonds, big buildings and stuff, so forth. There's a lot going on. The very first character you meet in the very first chapter is a guy who dies. Oops, spoiler. He dies shortly after. He's not a main character. So you're kind of like, what's going on here? Who's the main character? What's going on? So I spent a lot of the novel trying to figure out why are we looking at this, like what's the point of this going on? What's the point of this character? Maybe this one guy was a catalyst to introduce this other character who's just a minor character. It starts off with minor characters or throwaway characters to just describe cool little technological things. Like the guy has a skull gun. He's got a little point drilled into his head, and there's a gun that he can briefly shoot. And then he talks about like the guy has this system set up, this electrical system set up that stimulates his individual muscle fibers at random individually. So like that's his way of bodybuilding, not lifting weights, but electrical stimulation of his entire muscular system. So he's like just this big bad thug, and his brief appearance, like when the novel started off with him, like I was like, oh, this is neat, this is interesting, I wonder where this is going to go. The next thing you know, he dies, and then you're talking about some little girl who with a book. Okay, and this book that she has is it's like the internet. It's like an interactive internet thing where a person is interacting with her through the book, but the book is also capable of creating like video game type scenarios, but obviously very realistic looking. And this little girl who comes from a broken home, she gets this book. She spends a crazy amount of time. Basically, she's raised by the book, and the other woman on the other side of this book, which these two spend most of the book trying to find each other. This person is eventually essentially comes out to be her mother. Now, in the at the very last page of the book, you find out sort of what the climax of what was happening. Like it's like the very last page, and it ends. So I don't know, like building up that's a slow burn. Building up entire story just to climax and end at the very last page was difficult for me. Difficult reading. Maybe a special kind of person really enjoys this type of book. You can like the things that Neal Stephenson finds interesting and fixates on. One thing I really like though about Neal Stephenson books is he almost always has some kind of throwaway sentence that I find very compelling, because it just makes you think. It changes the way you perceive things, and you wonder how many other things could be perceived in that way. Like he has a very interesting way in Cryptonomicon where he describes the human like brain and skull system and how we're kind of set up. He just has an excellent way of describing it. I can't reproduce that here. You got to just Google search Cryptonomicon brain description or whatever, and you'll find that. But I found it. One thing interesting in Zodiac is he describes plastic as basically frozen gasoline, which when you think about that, it's like, wow, that's what plastic is. Like that's the most interesting way I've ever heard plastic described, and it makes me wonder: are there ways of describing other things like that? That just kind of gives you a radical new perspective on something that's previously mundane to you, that has been around you your entire life, and you don't think about what it is. Yeah, and don't burn it. So the throwaway phrase in this book I found interesting was he's just describing this little girl and how she was breathing in air, and like the air was turning into her, kind of thing. And when you think about it, it is weird to think about, but we do in some small way become the air that we breathe because of the nitrogen and the oxygen and the things that we get from that get washed into our bodies and used and delivered into cells and utilized, and I don't know, we do kind of become the air. Well, I mean, we use the air as one of the building blocks of our existence. I find that interesting because you don't often think of like what you're literally made out of, and you don't think of every breath you take as part of what makes you what you are as a human being existing in this universe And I found that very interesting, and he tends to do this in his books, and they're worth reading for a lot of the interesting little tidbits that are in them. So he has a lot of really cool descriptions of nanotechnology. He has a great imagination in telling you all the different things, ways that they could be used, even battles that take place using nanotechnology, how some nanotechnology are basically searching and destroying other nanotechnology that's just out and about. And if you don't know what nanotechnology is, it's super tiny machines, molecule-sized machines. So, and I had watched a video where the problem with nanotechnology is they can't get it to assemble. Like they can create a bunch of neat things, but they can't get nanotech to actually self-assemble, I believe is the issue that they're having with it right now. So he's got a very interesting point of view. Another thing is, even though he wrote the book in the 80s, it doesn't come across as dated in any way. And I find that you'll find that with any Neal Stephenson book, whether it takes place in the future or wherever, the book does not feel dated, which, and the funny thing is, like, when you watch movies from the 80s, obviously, and from any other time period, they feel dated, especially if they're doing anything in the sci-fi realm. But with words, with the written word, you can get away with a lot more. And Neal Stephenson is excellent at getting away with whatever he wants in his realm of writing. Do all the characters act like how you'd expect them to act? Are all the scenes believable? Do we care that much about the virtual reality that Nell, the female character, protagonist, is in the book? I found that personally, I just had trouble finding the story compelling. I found a lot of the little tidbits to be more interesting than the story. That gave me more to think about than the story itself. But he does have very interesting and complex sort of James Bond bad guy scenarios, like end of the world kind of scenarios. There does seem to be a lot of end of the world or world changing things in his books. Like when he doesn't write nonsense. Now I still have yet to read the Baroque cycle. That's the only real thing I haven't read of his, and I'll eventually get around to it. But I'm not like such a giant Neal Stephenson fan that I want to just dive right into his next work. And the Diamond Age was like, I had heard it recommended so much, I was like, okay, I finally have an opportunity to read this on my breaks at work and on my lunch at work. So on my phone, and I'm just like, I'll read it through. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you guys. If you love the book, tell me why in the comments below. Otherwise, I don't know. Or point me to a really good book review of that book that will make it a little bit more mind-blowing, a little bit more interesting to myself. But this is going to be a short video anyways because I didn't have too much to say about the book. I don't want to talk about literally everything I remember about the book. That's boring for me, probably boring for you. I just want to have interesting discussion regarding the books that I read. Some books you get a lot from, some books you don't get a whole lot from, and just that's the only real thing to take away from this. Something maybe just wasn't in my taste this time. So I'll leave you with that, and have a good rest of your day reading Adam out.